Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. As many of you know, my name is Prue Klein, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Wine Communicators of Australia. It's a pleasure today to have our guest presenter, Georgia Rasmussen, DTC Business Coach and Strategic Consultant, joining us. Welcome, Georgia.
Thank you, Prue.
Today, Georgia will be looking at benchmarking your existing DTC channel versus the global DTC winery market. Through that process, she will discuss and define the key metrics you should be tracking to measure your success, and then walk through how to prioritize your to-do list to drive improvement in the program. We've allowed plenty of time for questions that you may have to be answered at the end of Georgia's presentation. However, I encourage you to put those questions in as soon as they come to mind, and you can do that via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording sent to all registered attendees 24 hours post. It is now my pleasure to hand over to you, Georgia, for today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Prue, and welcome everybody. So today's webinar, I'm just going to make sure that I can move this screen easily. Yes, I can. Is about benchmarking your DTC program. And I'm hoping that it's not going to be too dry. Often I'm sort of trying to rush through a whole lot of areas, but I really think that the data and the analytics is just so important, and the reporting and predictive modelling, that I've decided to dedicate today's conversation to that. Just a little bit of my background. I've been in the wine trade for a long time. Started off at Orlando Wyndham and spent a lot of time at Cellar Masters in the 90s, and then took that experience into the trade business in the US in the early 2000s. And then I've obviously still been in the sort of direct marketing space, and then launched my own consulting business. And I mentioned that background because I was looking at some of the global stats and trends, I guess, particularly across the US market and the Australian market as I was preparing this webinar. And I thought to myself, when did Cellar Masters actually start? I started at Cellar Masters in 1993. But in doing that research, I came across this article that I wanted to share with you today, just briefly. And I first of all want you to note the date on this. So this is dated September 22, it's online, September 22, 1989. So what interested me about this article is that it just reiterated what I've always said when I'm talking in these sort of webinars, and I guess to clients, is that we're not doing anything new. We're just doing it in a different channel. So as a starting point, I'm just going to flick through a couple of comments that you'll see I've circled in red, and I'm going to call them out. So the first point here, Cellar Masters is an unusual retailer. Well, it's not anymore, but it was then. But I just wanted to note here that even back in 1989, Cellar Masters was spending $6 million on their ad spend. So that's an sales to ad ratio of 14%. I wonder what you guys are spending. What is your ad to sales ratio that you're investing in this channel to grow your business? So that's just a thought starter. And then the next point underneath that is that really we are all direct marketers. We could be selling books, we could be selling widgets, we could be selling China dolls, but we happen to be selling wine. And this is not to take the romance out of the wine industry or the sector, but just to get you all thinking about the fact that you are direct marketers, and direct marketing is a discipline, and it's really a data-based discipline, and it's been going for a long time. The article continues, and I'm just a bit slow. I've had to screen share the reverse way, so my buttons are a little bit slower, so I apologize for that. And then I'll let you guys read this article when you get the recording, but this slide basically says what you're doing is not new. So you'll see down the bottom, and remembering this is 1989, 35 years ago, before some of you were born probably. But it says here, offers are mailed to club members who buy on credit cards or by mail or phone. And the orders are picked in the warehouse, and they're on the customer's doorstep in about a week. So what we're doing is not new. And this slide talks about the fact that it's all database building a relationship between your customers. And this says telemarketers. Remember, this is back in the day where there was no digital or website. But basically just saying, you know, that this is about relationship building with the consumer, which is what you guys are doing every day. And then finally, it talks about the investment in the back end. And this is really what leads into what I want to talk about today. So whilst the concept of what we're doing is quite simple and it sounds easy, but the back end is quite complex and investment is required in that area to make it work. So this says back in 1989 that more than $3 million had been spent on computer hardware and software since the business was set up in 1982. They employed 120 people, had 40 phone operators, which were the people taking orders and doing the customer service, and they employed 12 computer programmers. Now, those programmers obviously built the platform, which is what a lot of the software providers, the SaaS providers, are trying to replicate today. But they also had a number of data analysts that were looking at intricate levels of customer data. So in the spirit of that, just as a bit of context, I want to sort of move into today's conversation about your channel potential and your budgeting and your analytics, and to emphasize just how important that is. And without that, you really don't have a yardstick. Some of you may have seen this DTC roadmap that I've taken to using over the last year or two, but it sort of just, I guess, isolates the different areas of thinking for all of you that are operating in the channel. And you can see just by looking at this slide that it is complex. And, you know, I've talked about seller masters and the fact that they had 120 people driving their business. And I know in a lot of your businesses that it's just it's one or two of you. So this whole issue of scale and resource continues to be a real challenge in these micro direct marketing businesses, wine direct marketing businesses. That being said, there is plenty that you can do to get your house in order, to see exactly how your business is performing and to predict how your business is going to perform. And that's what I want to focus on today. Reporting data analysis equals lots of money here over on the right hand side. And it really is. I mean, it's, again, I don't want to hark back too much about seller masters, but the value, that business was first sold in 2001. And the valuation on that business was the list. Where's the value in the list? It's in knowing who the customers are, what they're spending. That was the forward valuation. So that is the value of your business as well. And, you know, I just strongly encourage you to understand what's sitting in that list, because the money is sitting in there. You can't win if you don't know the score. Sounds obvious, but I know I go into a lot of your businesses and there's just a total lack of budgeting and a lack of data and a lack of understanding at both management and operational level about the nuances of the numbers within the direct marketing space. So that is where I'm wanting you to focus your attention. You just can't win if you don't know the score. You've got to be able to measure your business. If you can see the score, you'll be able to see how and when you're going to win. So the questions I want you to ask yourself are these. How are you leveraging the data in your business? How are you leveraging the data day to day? And that can be macro data. It could be regional global trends. It could be your own P&L for direct to consumer, which I'll talk a bit more about down the track. Or it could be the data within your database. But how are you leveraging the data in your channel? For those in management, how are you upskilling your team members? Are you sending them off to do an ADMAR course around analytics? Are you teaching them how to run a P&L? Are you sharing your product margins with them? Do they have access to broader data within the business? Do they work alongside your accountant? So how are you upskilling your team members? And thirdly, how are you attracting talent around these skills? And I think this is one of the ongoing challenges for all of you, and I understand that, is that in the regional areas, there's just not a huge depth of I guess, direct marketing experience or digital experience that tends to be centred in Sydney and Melbourne, in the capital cities, but it is out there and it can be taught. It can absolutely be taught. You know, I was thinking again in preparation, this is a little digression, but my daughter has just got into the Sydney Swans Academy. Yay, she's very excited about that. And the selection process for that was not necessarily how good they were at football, but how good their aptitude was and whether they were athletes and they had potential. So my point being, you know, you're all smart and you have the ability to learn this stuff, but it has to be a focus from the top down in the business. You know, and all too often putting data to use is the missing piece in the D2C strategy. So just jot down those questions and reflect on those questions for a moment. I won't spend too much time on this slide, except to say that there are lots of specialist skills that are needed, and a data analyst is one of them. You know, it might not be you. This is the other thing. It may not be you being the data analyst, but there may be a data analyst in your business. Go fishing around the accounts area, or, you know, there'll be somebody in there that has that aptitude. So you need to try and leverage that. The other thing that I have been thinking about is, knowing that a lot of you are operating in a small environment that's resource poor, why would you not consider pooling a data analyst from outside of your business? You know, I think gone are the days where you're really competing with every other winery in your region. You've got to start pooling some of these resources, or I think you're not going to accelerate and make the impact that you want to make. So maybe you share a data analyst with 4 or 5 other wineries, just throwing that out there. But it's definitely a specialist area. So I just want to move into a couple of these high-level market conditions for direct-to-consumer in 2023, and this is part of the benchmarking at the macro level. So what we're seeing in the US is that the impacts of inflationary economy, budget tightening by consumers, increased costs for wineries, services and debt, are leading to a contraction in the D2C wine shipping channel. I think this is really interesting. This trend has not hit the Australian shores yet. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. A, we lag, our economic indicators lag behind the US. But I also think the Australian market is at a different stage of the life cycle in this whole D2C journey than the US. And I'm just going to share a thought with you here about life cycles of businesses. You guys will have a life cycle, and I'll talk about the predictive model around your life cycle in your micro winery, in your own winery. But there is then also this regional life cycle, if you like, around D2C. And just think about this for a minute. So Cellar Masters, which I talked about earlier, launched in 1982, was sold in 2000. How many years is that? You know, it is about 20 years. When they sold, they were at the top of their powers. The business had grown really quickly through the 90s. They were flatlining. 20 years. The US, we're just hearing, that data's just coming through now, is that their clubs programs and the D2C side of things is flatlining. I went to the US in 2001. We're now 2023. So there's, my point being, there's this natural growth cycle for these businesses based on a couple of levers that I'll talk about in a minute. And then if we look at the Aussie market that you're all operating in, when I came back from the US, I launched my consulting business in 2008. It's now 2023. So we are behind. We are behind the US in that growth curve and that cycle. And my prediction is that we've got about five years of growth left, 6 years of growth left, and then we will also start flatlining. And one thing for sure in the US, obviously the club programs are the big growth areas, but they haven't got the silver bullet for the next level of growth. The website was going to be it during COVID, but a lot of that has come back since the broad market has reopened. So look, these are just interesting thoughts. Think about the life cycle and the size of your opportunity and what it means to you. Okay, moving on. I digressed a little bit there, but moving on, just with regards to these inflationary indicators, watch for headwinds in this area. That I know that a lot of wineries are increasing their prices right now, so that is going to have some impact down the track. Cases and net sales showed positive growth again in 21-22, and this should continue unless we see a little reduction in the spend in the recessionary cycle if we get to that. And then the final market indicator is that approximately 10% of volume here is going direct to consumer. Now, what can you take of that into your business? I think just knowing those broad indicators are important. The 10% is really neither here nor there because that depends on the size of your winery. And if I just flick to this slide, I've looked through the list of who is on this call, and you're all at different sizes. You know, some of you are really small, some of you are really pretty big. And therefore, the percentage of volume, percentage of cases that you can expect to go through the direct-to-consumer channel will vary. And I just have a look at this and pinpoint where you are out of the case volumes, and then benchmark your percentage that should be going direct. Now, this ends up being just a matter of maths, and obviously I just need to put a caveat in here. This is talking about if wineries have a cellar door. We don't have the panacea or the silver bullet for wineries without a cellar door. It's more complicated without a doubt. But, you know, this is your first kind of benchmark. How big is my winery and what should I be aiming for? And obviously, these percentages will vary on where you are in the growth curve, in the life cycle of D2C within your winery. But use that as a benchmark. So some other current macro D2C trends, cellar door and wine club, no surprises here. They continue to be the main drivers of sales in 21-22. They always have been, they always will be. They were for cellar masters back in the 80s. Remember, that was a wine club model. And they will be for you too. So if you don't have a recurring wine club program, switch it over. I know I'm still working with wineries that don't have that, but it is a no-brainer. And then the other thing I would ask you to consider there is just the frequency within that program. If it's annual, you might be able to offer something biannually as well, or triannually, to lift your average cases, etc. It's a little bit of playing around with the wine club structure. So they are the main drivers. The wine club growth rate was down slightly on the year prior, which I think is interesting. That depends on where we are again on that macro growth curve, but the attrition rates are increasing. And this is interesting because you will find that as you go through the life cycle of, or your growth cycle, so think of the life cycle of a brand, it's like the life cycle of your channel. As you get to the more mature end, your attrition rates are going to start increasing because you'll hit the cap on the average lifetime of a customer. And we know that sits at around 3 years, 3.5 years for the average member. So expect that to increase over time. It just means you have to work harder on your retention when you're in the more mature stages of that cycle. Few quick ones here. Luxury wines are outpacing the growth of less expensive wines, which is absolutely a trend that we see at wineries. You know, the cellar doors and the retailers tend to sell the bulk of the lower end wines, and then the wine club sells a higher percentage of luxury wines. Out of the demographics, the male boomers are the only group that are purchasing more wine at the moment. They're the only ones in growth. The others are in sort of flatlining. Millennial women are outpacing millennial men in their D2C purchasing growth, not necessarily value, but growth percentage. And just another one here, millennial women tend to purchase at lower average order values, but more frequently. And this, I guess, starts to dovetail into knowing your demographics, knowing your list. And then those were trends that are across the broad global market. And then these are some trends that are coming back into this, specifically into the Australian market. So the average price per bottle remains steady. So we're not seeing the inflationary movement yet, but watch the space this year. I think we will. Average bottles per order increase slightly. So this comes into obviously your average order value and your average units per order, which is a key metric that you need to be looking at because it's something that you can leverage through your offer structure. And then the average conversion rates to the cellar door and list. And interestingly, there wasn't any data on this. And a lot of this I'm referencing, I should say, is coming from analytics and Wine Direct. So they have a huge data lake that they are now sort of pooling and looking at these large macro trends, and that will apply. It'll apply across the board. It's not specific to Wine Direct, but it's terrific that they're doing it. The challenge is that because the wineries are so individual, what does it tell you? It gives you macro trends, but you then have to readjust that for the size of your winery. But interestingly, my point was going to be they don't have conversion rates for the cellar door and list, which I thought was interesting, but I know through my own experience that list conversion on average to a list is about 5 to 10%, and on average to a wine club is about 2 to 6%. Now, there are some that are doing better than 6%. Obviously, there's some outliers that are doing it incredibly well. But these are averages. So ask yourself where you sit within those two numbers. I've already made these comments. I sort of jumped ahead, but this was about the growth cycle. And I don't know if that's sort of over your head or whether it's too big picture thinking, but it is about this growth cycle in the US market and now the Australian market and how we're positioned and where our opportunity is. And the other thing I would say is, remember, it's not just the wineries. This is retailers as well. So they are after the share of wallet, direct to consumer share of wallet. Dan Murphy's, I know there's some Endeavour people on the line today. They are doing it incredibly well. They now own Cellar Masters. So they've bought all of that IP along with them. But that is your competitive set. You're competing with all of these retailers. So the further ahead they get, the harder it makes it for you guys. The one asset you have obviously is your cellar door and the experience side of things. And I think you're all doing an excellent job at that. But I guess my point is just to be aware and that there is this natural, predictable growth rate and growth curve at the winery, but also at the regional and global level. So at the end of the day, you need an appetite for data. You need to understand that you're managing and optimizing a data set as much as you are engaging consumers and selling wine. And you need to understand where you are on the growth curve so that you can manage expectations and set the appropriate strategies and cost structures for where you are in the cycle. The reality, the sad reality, if you're a 10,000 case winery, the level of sophistication and infrastructure that you are going to be able to implement as a cost item in your P&L is going to be less than a 100,000 case winery who's able to take that cost on board and amortize it across a much larger sales volume. So it's hard. It's hard for all of these small, and when I say small, I would say, anything sort of 5 to 25 to 30,000 case wineries. And I know there's a number of you on the line, but that's where I would suggest that you start pooling your assets and maybe doing something regionally. Think differently. Think of, how else can I skin this cat? So it's an important mindset and it's an imperative for benchmarking, which is what we're talking about today. And these are the 4 areas that I really, really encourage you to spend time on within your business. And it doesn't matter at what level of the business you're in, whether you're the CEO, the GM, the direct marketing manager, even the consultants that are on the call. These are things that you should be encouraging your clients to be looking at. So what is the size of your opportunity? And I'll detail that a little bit more, but there's a really simple, and I actually went through it in the Wine Australia webinars a couple of years ago. There's a really simple model, which is in my toolkit that I'll talk about later in the prezzo. But there's a really simple way to, I guess, predict the size of your opportunity based on a couple of variables. That is the first thing you need to do. If you can't do Excel, find someone who can. Give me a call. It's really easy. But you need to understand the size of your opportunity. If you're a direct marketing manager and you can take that to your boss and say, well, I know that I can triple this business in 3 or 4 years' time, because here's the growth curve, here's what it looks like. I know my traffic, I know my conversion rates, I know my attrition rates, and I know my average order values. Then your boss is going to be more likely to possibly invest in a data analyst or in upgrading your software or in increasing the resources available to you to grow your business and get there faster, because you can get there faster just by doing it better. So what is the size of your opportunity? I'd love everyone to put in the chat box whether or not you know the size of your opportunity and whether you've modeled it. Just a simple yes or no. It'll just be really interesting to see. And if it's a no, please get off this call and do that as your first thing. The second thing is to measure your macro channel performance. And what I mean by that is run a P&L for your direct-to-consumer channel. Don't run a P&L through to EBIT for the business and then just have direct sales as a sales line item. Run a separate P&L. You guys know as well as I do that for every bottle sold in the trade, you have to sell 3 bottles for every bottle sold direct, you have to sell 3 in the trade. So there is enormous value in this channel. And I think you need to be running a separate P&L. Again, go back to your accountant and say that you want to do a little sub P&L that feeds back into the business P&L alongside your on-premise and trade channels. But you must be looking at that. You must be looking at your sales. You must know your margins. This is the other thing that interests me, is that a lot of the people running the direct-to-consumer channel aren't given margin information. And if there are GMs and CEOs out there, please give your staff the product margins, because that way they have way more flexibility to look at offer structure and also, I guess, to play around with that P&L to deliver the right amount of profit for the business. And I'm starting to sound so old because I am getting old, but one of the best parts of my education at Seller Masters was having to meet with our CEO every 2 weeks. We had to present all of our offer data, and we had full access to the company P&L, full access to the Seller Masters P&L. We knew all the expense items, we knew all of the margins, we knew all the ad costs. And I think that given that this channel is just so highly measurable, that access to information will just give you a better result from your staff, and it'll give you better results from your business. So are you measuring your macro channel performance through an individual P&L? Thirdly, are you measuring your micro campaign performance? And I know a lot of you have heard me go on about this before. And again, it's in the templates that are in my toolkit, but are you measuring every single campaign through to net contribution? I think a lot of people are using Google Analytics, and they're looking at sales, and they're looking at click-throughs, they're looking at conversions, but they're not adding in below the line. They're not looking at advertising. They're not looking at net contribution per number emailed or mailed. And it leaves off this whole idea of profitability. Was my offer profitable or was it not? And you can't run what ifs if you don't have the below the line data. So are you measuring your micro campaign performance? Again, ask yourself when you get off this call. And then the last one, and these are sort of in order of priority. The last one is, are you using customer demographics and purchasing data to segment your list? So it'd be just really great if you reflected on those for a minute, because I think if you can, you'll just have so much more visibility and flexibility to impact your business if you have that data at your fingertips. You've seen me say that already. I'll say it again. You can't win if you don't know the score, but you can. If you can see the score, you'll be able to see how and when you're going to win. So I've talked about that in detail. That was just a bit of a flesh out of the slide prior, so I'm not going to go through that in detail. You can look at it again in the recording if you want to. And the channel potential I've talked a little bit about. I just, again, want to highlight how simple this is, but you need to be measuring some things before you can do this. So are you getting a really clear look at your visitation? Are you measuring on a daily, weekly, bi-monthly and monthly basis your conversions to list and club? Are you measuring your attrition rates? Are you looking at your average order values? Just simply sales divided by orders. They are the only variables you need to model this out really simplistically. But it's critical to the accuracy to be measuring those basic things first. Okay. So channel potential, what is the size of my opportunity? The next part here, again, I've sort of talked about this, but this comes back to your strategic planning and your budgeting. The budgeting is so critical at the P&L level. But in my world, it's also really critical to do a bottom-up sales budget. So this comes back to your strategy. We talked a few slides back about what is the size of my opportunity, what percentage of my volume is going to go direct to consumer. From there, it is looking at the size of your opportunity based on your assets. If you've got to sell a door, what's the traffic, etc. And then from there, it is deciding on your communication strategy and modeling that as well, which just gives you it's a very accurate sales figure. And I know the clients that I've worked with who are using the budgeting tool, it just provides a lot of clarity, but it also gives you a wonderful place to store all of your history, just the history of all of your campaign results. It also gives you the added benefit of being able to run what if scenarios really easily. So let's say you're 100 grand short this month on your sales. Well, what can I tweak in my campaigns? Do I add in another email? Do I take out another one? Do I add in an outbound call? What do I do to keep on top of my sales targets? It's just a really great tool. Gives you great visibility. So this whole idea of strategic planning and budgeting is really critical. I think it's lacking, sorely lacking in the D2C space. Probably sounds really brutal, but I don't ever see any good budgeting. I see a rough sales number, but there's no detail, often no detail sitting underneath it. I think it's an area that the category could really improve on. And if you were outside of the wine category and you were in a website, a large website business, a sporting website business, or anywhere else, you would be doing really detailed budgets. So I just think get in the game. So they're I guess the two higher level reporting things. And then we move into the key basic metrics that you need to track. And these are every month, every campaign, every month. Sorry, not every campaign, every month. This is your monthly reporting pack. So you should be looking at, outside of your P&L, you should be looking at direct sales as a percentage of total sales, including your margin and your profit. You should be looking at sales by channel. What's coming through the tasting room, what's coming through the wine club, what's coming through email, website events, partnerships, and other. Have them as a separate line item. Are they up, down, improving, going backwards? Why? Analysis, getting into the data to create the picture of what's happening within your business. Don't fly blind. Traffic by day, by week, by month. Most of you, I'm sure, are doing that, but some are not. If you're not, you need to be. Conversion to traffic and listing club, that needs to be done daily, weekly, monthly. And I think some of the web platforms are allowing that to be tracked on the dashboard way more easily these days. So conversion to those things. Then you need to be looking every month at your attrition rates. What's happening with my list and my club? Is it stable? Is it going back? Was there a glitch? Did I send out a shipment? Something happening in the economy? Was there an interest rate rise? But just putting some rationale behind what's happening with those attrition rates will help you know whether it's a glitch or whether you've got a fundamental issue in your business and you need to be working on retention, etc. You also need to be measuring the average length of tenure in your wine club. It's a simple analysis of start date and cancellation date. But what is the average tenure? You heard me say before, the average tenure is roughly 3.5 years in a wine club. It's the same in America. It was the same for Cellar Masters. Same, but different across 30 or 40 years. So there's a natural life of these things. Just know that. Just know that that's the number, that that's the benchmark, that that's your target. If you're not hitting that target, is my service really bad? Or is my offering not quite right? Etc. But you need to be measuring that and reporting on it to the business every month. And then the last couple here, average number of purchases per annum, orders as a percentage of total list, and then average value of purchases per annum, total sales divided by orders. They're all pretty simple ratios. And then average units per order and average order value. These are all really simple metrics. I know for some of you, they're not easy to get and they're not easy to find, but I would almost implore you to set up a template and set the expectation within your business that these things need to be tracked, and work out how in the hell you're going to do it. It might be with the support of your accountant. It might be that the business supports you and gets you some help a day a week just to work on these reports. But they're the first thing that I'd be doing. If I had a winery and I was starting a business, all of it would be going direct to consumer because I know that's where the profit lies and I've got more control. But the very first thing I'd be doing are these numbers, is running these numbers and the analysis. So the next level down to that is obviously the full campaign analysis, where let's say you're sending out an email and you are, I don't know, you're doing this every month and you're reporting back on whether it's been profitable or not. And this is what I was talking about. For a lot of you are doing this through to here, through to sales. So you're looking at circulation, you're looking at opens, response rate, number of orders, average units per order, because Google Analytics will supply that. You're looking at the unit value and the total sales, but you need to overlay that with your margin. What's your margin percentage? And you guys should have control of that. You should be able to give away a bit of margin if you want to. You might say, I'm going to try this month to do a value add. I'm going to give away some margin to see if I can increase the response rate because I want to increase engagement with one of my quadrants of customers. So you need this information to be able to play around with your offer, your communication strategy. And then obviously plugging in your ad costs and then looking at net contribution per number mailed. But every campaign you're running should have this analysis. And that's the budget document I was talking about before, the bottom-up sales budget. I hope this is making sense. I feel like you're probably all asleep in your lunch at this point, but it's, you know, it's dry, but it's so important, and it is actually where it all starts. So then if we take it away from the size of your opportunity and then looking at your P&Ls and looking at your macro trends and then your campaign data, the additional analysis to optimize your business is really digging into the database and segmenting the database in as many ways, you know, as you think is viable in terms of helping you create better offers and better service for your customers. The one I love the most is the RFM analysis, the recency, frequency, monetary, which is your high, medium, low, inactive quadrants. So dig into that, have a look at it. It's vitally important, and you should all be able to do it. You should all be able to run an RFM analysis, even if it's rudimentary and ugly out of an Excel spreadsheet. You should all be able to run it. You should be looking at product purchase analysis by customer group, which I think a lot of you are doing. And then obviously the demographic analysis, and we've talked about that. You know, what are the males, what are the boomers doing? Have you got gender and age? So just do a gender and age split and look at what they're purchasing. You know, are they high actives, medium actives, low actives? What's their spend like? So just digging in and understanding that data will help drive your strategy, because the picture is in the numbers. Strategy is in the numbers. So how do you set your priorities? I realize you can't do everything at once, particularly if you're a smaller winery and you don't have a large team. But as I keep banging on about, you can understand the size of your opportunity. It's a 1 hour exercise. If you've got those metrics, it's not even a 1 hour exercise, but you can understand the size of your opportunity mapped over a 15-year period, and you can identify where you are in the growth cycle. That automatically gives you the opportunity to have conversations within the business about, well, we're in the growth cycle, or we're maturing, or we're flat. We're flat. I can't give you 10% growth, per annum without spending on, external list access or whatever it might be. But it gives you another opportunity to talk strategy, to talk realistically about where you are in your business. So please understand the size of your opportunity. Use macro data available to you to determine where you're underperforming and where the low-hanging fruit is for you. And knowing that the low-hanging fruit and the strategic focus will be very different depending on where you are in the growth cycle. Just read this macro data. I think I mentioned before that Wine Direct is putting out this, and I think a lot of you have sort of now tapped into this, but it's a free report. This is not a Wine Direct plug, but it's just a plug to go and have a look at the analytics data, because I think you'll like it. If nothing else, it gives you the terminology and a really good look at the things that you should be measuring. It's got some great definitions, etc. But it is a big data lake coming out of their 2,000 plus wineries that are on Wine Direct. There's something like 1.5 billion orders that they've sliced and diced. So the data lake is real. And I just think that's useful for you to be looking at the trends, but it's not going to be super useful for all of you to look at those trends and go, okay, I can apply those directly back to my business, because you can't. Because remembering those trends are across large multinational businesses like Treasury Wine Estates, right through to the 10,000 case winery, and they're averaged. But the trends aren't interesting. So I've also just got this slide on setting your priorities, which was, something I was kind of thinking, how do I position what you should be focusing on if you're in the early launch stage or the growth and middle stage, or you're flat and mature? And I know, again, through looking at the list of wineries that are on this call today, that you're all at different stages, but this is how I would approach it. If I was launching, I would be doing these top 3 things. in this little red oval circle. I'd be establishing the size of my opportunity. I'd be cranking up my budgets, and I'd be doing my reporting templates. And I would be optimizing my tasting room, and I'd be cranking out a wine club. That's what I would be doing. That would be my sole focus. Then if I was still growing, if I was growing nicely, and look, in the first few years, you'll grow at 50% or maybe 100%, and then 80%, 70%, right through to sort of 40, 30, 20%. If I was in that phase, I would still be focusing on my wine club because I know there's growth there and I know that's my low-hanging fruit. I'd be starting to look at wine club retention because my members might have been on for 2 or 3 years, and I'd be starting to focus on retention. I would also be activating heavily my email program, my telemarketing program, my website and my socials to feed into list and engagement and retention. But I would also be starting to get into some of these deep analytics in this stage. You can't really do that here because you don't have enough data, but certainly 2, 3, 4 years in, I would start running my RFM analysis, my predictive analysis. I would have set them up, or I would have set the reports up here, but I'd be running them very frequently here, probably once a month, maybe once a month to once a quarter, to see if there's any changes or things that I would want to bring into my strategy, my communication strategy. And then if I was a flat to mature business, still be focusing on my wine club because I know I've still got to be feeding them in, even though they'll be dropping out at the same amount. I'd be absolutely focusing on retention to try and hang on to my customers. And I'd be working like crazy with this analysis to work out who my high potential attritors were in this group so I could hang on to them, i.e. send them a gift before the shipment or just do something. There's a million ideas. That's not what today is about. But I would be working the analytics very hard in terms of retention. I'd also be going hard at all of these other channels for contact and sales. And I would be starting to look at third-party list growth because I know that my wine club opportunity has capped out at the tasting room and I have to start looking externally. Now, the challenge with this is that, and the US is finding this too, there is no silver bullet outside of the cellar door in terms of really meaningful wine club growth. It's a hard sell. You're asking someone to commit a lot of money per annum. It's also incredibly competitive because you've got on-premise, you've got other retailers, you've got other direct lists, and you've got every other winery who's trying to do the same thing. So there is no silver bullet for that. There was in the past. You know, if you go back to Cellar Masters, and there's not really any point looking in the rear vision mirror, but their business was built on large bank lists. They had the luxury of going out to all those Qantas frequent flyers, all the NAB customers, all the ANZ customers, et cetera, et cetera. They were massive lists, which is really what allowed that business to grow. But people now understand the value of their list, so those lists aren't available. So it is challenging. I still think there is an opportunity there, but it would cost money. But that comes back to your ad to sales ratio and understanding cost per new member and lifetime value and all of those things. So it's for a mature business. And then under the bottom here, I've got customer journey mapping, which I think is something that should happen every step of the way. And then obviously, if you go back to the roadmap, fulfillment, customer service, resourcing, technology, etc., happens concurrently. So it's pretty hectic. Okay, I feel like I've rushed through that, but actually the timing is pretty good for some questions. So just in summary, what are the sources that are out there to help you? So you can use the macro data that's freely available to you. Just Google it, look up analytics, look up Wine Direct, and it's sitting there in the reporting section on the top tab. It's a great read. It'll, at the very least, it'll help familiarize you with what you need to be measuring and how you talk about it and what the comparison set is, etc. The second part is establish the key reports at your winery. Work with accounts, work with whoever it is, but establish this individual P&L for D2C. Look at your results by channel, and then by campaign, and then by customer segments, and always include margin analysis and profitability. You've got to take it right through to the bottom line. Just gives you much more power to negotiate for things within the business if you're talking bottom line profit. Ensure that you or your D2C team have the resources that they need, and if you don't have them in-house, which I know a lot of you don't, use short-term contractors. There's a number of you on this call, but use contractors to come in and model these reports to give you the data points you need. It's a once-up, do it once, but you need the discipline, and a lot of it is business discipline, to be running those reports and reporting on them every month. See if you can engage your GM or your CEO or whoever to do that monthly meeting. And I've put here, a bit cheekily, or buy my D2C toolkit. Some of you would have heard me talk about that before. It includes models, templates, benchmark numbers, library resources. So that is open to you as a bit of a cheap quick fix. And then I'm also offering mentoring packages with that toolkit if you need help actually doing it. You can just call me to discuss what that might look like depending on what you need. I'm not going to spend time on this, but just the headlines there, the toolkit includes my Excel workbook. It includes some general business management tools. It includes marketing and planning, so some dynamic customer journey templates, and then some general resources around glossaries and D2C calculations, etc. So that is available as a, and the intent there was to find a way of getting this information out more broadly rather than one-on-one, which is how I usually work. If you want to chat to me, here are my details. Jot them down, give me a call. I hope that has been useful. I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. I hope that's been useful. I know there's a lot of talking and I always find it hard. I was saying to Prue before I started, I always find it hard because I'm just looking at a green dot and I've got no idea if you're all asleep or nodding or I don't know. Anyway, I hope it was of some use. Listen to the recording again and just at least take out a few sound bites that you can chat to management about, or give me a call. Love to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Georgia. And I'll just remind everyone, we do still have a few minutes for Q&A. So please, whilst we've got Georgia with us today, type in those questions to the Q&A. I'll be happy to ask them to her. While they're coming through, Georgia, a question I had for you, that the understanding customer is obviously a really key element to success in the D2C space.
Yes.
For a wine business that maybe hasn't got a CRM system and maybe they've just got an Excel spreadsheet that has first name, last name, email address, postal, to get into better understand their customer and know their age group, the types of wine they're drinking, etc. Is doing a survey to your database effective from your experience, or is it another angle that wineries perhaps could take?
Look, I think surveys are tricky because I think people are more hesitant to give that data in a survey environment, and they sort of feel that if they're on your list or they're already on your wine club, why are they asking me more? That would probably be my gut response to that. But what I would say is, depending on what you've collected, you can run all sorts of thoughts and analysis just in your spreadsheet. I mean, it's chunky and it's a little clunky. Sorry, rather than chunky, it's a bit clunky. But you can glean a lot from just Excel data. And that's where, if you're not an expert in that area, I would say just get someone in, bring someone in for half a day or for 3 days and say, listen, here's the data. I've got it in an Excel format. Here are the, the fields that I'm looking at. Oh, sorry, that's not making sense. Here's the data I've got. Here are my questions. I want to understand, my gender split. I want to understand my average order values, blah, 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 blah. You can get most of that from your transactional data, which most people would have, even if they don't have a CRM.
Great. That's wonderful advice. Thank you. A couple of questions that have come through. Now, this is taking back to, I think, one of the first slides or the start of the presentation, just questioning what was the name of the upskilling course that you mentioned? It sounded like ADMA. You can just clarify what that upskilling course was?
Yeah, I always direct people to the Australian Direct Marketing Association, because we are direct marketers. That's what we are. And they have some great courses on analytics and measuring and all those sorts of things. They also have great courses on copywriting. They have great courses on all sorts of things, everything from A to Z on direct marketing. So yes, it's a great resource, admar.com.au.
Thank you. I'll check that out as well myself. And the other question was, but I think you've kind of answered, you reiterated this, was about where you sourced a lot of that data analytics stats that you shared. And I think that was really Wine Direct.
Yes, it was. So hop onto the Wine Direct, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not something that's charged, like people can just go on there and have a look at least the basic data, just download it.
No, look, it's really rich data, but it's macro data, because it is across 2,500 wineries that are all different shapes and sizes. So it's my point was, just be careful when you're looking at that benchmark data and bringing it back to your winery. It's excellent for broad market D2C trends, but you just need to be a little bit careful in terms of how you utilize that within your business, because those stats will vary based on your size of winery and where you are in the growth cycle. Yeah, but it's literally Wine Direct, and if you navigate along the top, you'll see it in, I can't remember, I think it's just a reports tab, and they've got a US market report tab, and they've got an Australian market report tab. The other thing I would say about the Aussie one is that there's only 170 wineries on Wine Direct in Australia, so the data pool is less, but it's totally statistically valid at 170. They'd have absolutely enough transactions to make it statistically valid.
Excellent. I suspect there'll be lots of wine businesses jumping online after this session.
Yeah, good.
Georgia, there hasn't been any other questions flow through at this stage, so I think we'll wrap things up. It's always a pleasure to have you join us, and I know you feel like you sound like a broken record, but what you have to say, I think, is invaluable, and there's, businesses of different stages of this whole D2C journey that I think had a lot of takeaways from today. So thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure.
To everyone online, please make a note in your diary. Tuesday, the 4th of April, will be the next WCA webinar. That's the Tuesday just before Easter. And registrations for that one will be open on our website very soon. So keep an eye out for details. For WCA members, all recordings from previous webinars are all housed on our website under education. So feel free to scroll through and have a look at some other topics. And if you have any suggestions of things you would like to see us cover in this year's program, there's still a couple of slots available, and I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at wca@winecommunicators.com.au. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Georgia has provided her contact details and also some fantastic resource options. So please don't hesitate to continue the conversation, the education by contacting Georgia direct. Thanks so much and have a great day.